Our first ever customer was a chimney sweep in London. It was the absolute kind of sweet spot problem that we solved. She was a nightmare customer, but probably completely the right nightmare customer right at the beginning. She told us everything she thought about the product.
Hello and welcome to Traction, the tech show, exploring innovation, growth and technology success. I'm James Taylor, founder of Roaring Mouse PR and a PR advisor to some of the world's most innovative technology companies. I'm here at Pen95 in Sheffield with my co-host Peter Hopton, founder of Very PC, Isotope and Venture Community. He's also an investor and mentor and the rockstar chairman to Productive Machines and Tuber. We're joined today by a very special guest, Chris Dalrymple, exited co-founder of Mina, now an investor and advisor at Trove Ventures. Chris, welcome to Traction.
Thank you.
How are you?
Very good, very good. Yeah, good to be here. Good to be out. Good to be out of my previous role. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, all happy and the sun's shining, which is good.
Excellent. We first met, I think, about 5 years ago. Very early days of Mina, just before COVID lockdown of 2020. Yeah. You've achieved an awful lot since then. How's that ride been?
I think I'm still digesting in truth, to be honest, because it is, as I guess you probably both had experience of or seen, is there's no time to stop throughout that whole thing. So it was a bit of a roller coaster, overwhelmingly positive, and I definitely can't complain. But I finished my kind of earnout period a few weeks ago, and it's probably only since then that I've actually had time to sit and review what happened and place some of it in my head. So, but yeah, it's good to be out, and it's good to kind of look back and see what we achieved. For
those who might not have heard of Mina, can you tell us about the business you built there and the journey you've been on?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mina was a software as a service, B2B business. It was in electric vehicle charging. So the core of the concept was large fleets like BT Openreach and Centrica, they are trying to transition to electric vehicles at scale. They might have a few thousand electric vans. The core of the problem we solved is where those vans go home with drivers overnight, and they're plugging those vans into their home energy supply. How do you make sure that they're getting paid accurately for that energy that they're being used? And obviously, especially in the midst of an energy crisis where costs are rising, there's a lot of worry from drivers there. So we created a little bit of software that basically solved that very niche problem. We created it myself, Ashley Tate, who's been in Sheffield, starting businesses for a long time, Andy Gunn, who's our technical co-founder. So we met end of 2019. Ash had the idea for quite a long time, actually, but wanted a team to go and do it with because he'd run a few businesses on its own and knew it's a lonely place and didn't want to do it again. And yeah, we set up. We had an office in Kelham. We went through angel funding, bit of Innovate UK, and then we struck up a partnership with a US company called Corpay, who actually invested initially and then exited. But all of that happened within the span of just over 3 years from founding the business to exiting. And we had, I think, 43 people down in Kelham by the time we sold. And the core of that business is now within Corpay. So we sold a couple of years ago, and then the three of us as founders have had the last couple of years to try and integrate that business, our business, into the parent business. And probably at the point where this goes out, all of us will be finished or close to finished as the three founders and looking at the next thing.
And how has the adjustment been from full on building a business, then integrating a business to not?
Very strange. Yeah, I think the thing that I was most surprised by was how difficult it was to adjust to the post acquisition period. So the 2 years that we were contractually kept into the business. I think you go through this process, and we built Mina to sell it. That was always our ambition. That was always the aim. And so you work up until this point of exit, of trying to get the business acquired, and then literally kind of on the Friday night, I remember everything's signed, everything's done. and then you come in on the Monday and you're still working. It's just you have a boss now, and it's a very different way of working, and you have lots of different considerations. And that period was intense, actually, and just a very different type of stress to running a business on our own, running our own business. So I'd characterise the 2 years afterwards as a quite stressful, but quite a different stress. And then finishing, it's a very odd feeling to kind of walk away from some of those obligations that you had during that earn-out period. Incredibly freeing, but like I said, I suppose I'm trying to use it, trying to do things like this, trying to work with new startups, in part just as a way of trying to kind of tell my own story, get it out of my head, understand what happened, make sure those lessons are fresh, because we were very fortunate in some ways. We made some very good decisions along the way. We made some bad ones. We were very good with luck and timing. We were very good with the team that we had. But I think it's really important to be very pragmatic about the lessons that you learn from that period, really. So I'm trying to reflect on that and make sure it's fresh, and make sure I don't just kind of move on from that period.
I've heard it described as mourning.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely part of that in there. Part of it depends on what, I guess, how the parent company treat your business and your people and your brand. And I won't go into too much detail. I can't go into too much detail, but I think there were periods post-acquisition where we thought, okay, this has all been kept as it was, and we've, not much changes. And then inevitably for a big business, they have to react. The strategy changes, different things happen, and so maybe the direction changes a little. And so I think, yes, a little bit of mourning, but I think a fair amount of, the main thing for me was stress, thinking about the people that we'd recruited. We recruited these people into Mina and given them opportunities, and they worked so hard for us. They ran through walls for us, and we gave them. Everyone was a shareholder who'd been there for kind of a reasonable amount of time, so they got some kind of reward. But also, you're very aware that these people came into a startup, not to one of the biggest payment companies in the world, right? So the biggest thing for me, the biggest stress, was doing right by the people that were there and making sure that they were protected and looked after and still kind of motivated to do their jobs.
It's interesting. The best founders, rule number one for them is look after your people. And it's certainly up rule number one for me in a post-founder situation where you're then looking at how you're going to inspire other founders to operate their business. Rule number one is look after your people. You've got to create a cult of talent, and the reason you're able to move so quickly and innovate is because you've got a small number of really good people.
Yeah.
And those who don't look after their people end up having a large number of mediocre people and end up immobilized.
Yeah, and it surprises me often how little people realise that all a business is a collection of people. Like, there is nothing else. There might be some IP or some technology, but it's a collection of people. So yeah, to your point, unless you've got a really highly motivated team who are pulling in the right direction, who believe in what they're doing, who feel protected, how else would you get success as a business without having that? And so I definitely felt an obligation to those people that we brought with us. I think when you're post-acquisition, obviously it's a lot harder to, you don't set the rules anymore, basically. You have to fall into a much bigger corporate culture. And there are some positives, the guys got much better benefits working for a big US company than they did working for a tiny startup. But in terms of strategy and direction, we didn't make the decisions any longer, and so it was much harder to give reassurance when you're running your own business. Obviously, it can come from you, and that's the truth. When you're working for someone else, we have to kind of go and find out the answer sometimes, and that's much harder. And so that was probably the biggest stress is the people side.
It's funny, you start these things and you have this culture of belief that the world is different to everybody else, how everybody else sees it. and you adopt people into this culture of belief. But as you start to succeed, the world that ends up becoming more mainstream. And as you get acquired by a large company, there's then more that has become more mainstream. And you end up in a scenario where at the very start you were alien to society in this culture of belief, and then you've like evolved into a point where you're mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's quite an interesting journey, isn't it?
It is, and I think we had quite a few people within Mina where it was maybe their first job out of university as well, and so the I think probably the realization as we were acquired that Mina at the beginning was a very different type of business to a lot of other businesses, because the only comparison they ever had was when we were acquired, and they saw a very kind of more traditional, more established business, and how different culturally that is, because it has to, because it's got such scale. But absolutely, I think kind of you're bringing people in early days, and there's no rules really for how you want your culture to be, and so people define it in the way that they want to. But yeah, as you mature, naturally that has to be a bit more, I guess, systematic or a bit more structured.
Can we go back to those early days? I mean,
yeah.
The boom in electric vehicles, it's clearly that's something that's happening and will probably continue to happen. At what point did you realise that the idea and the hypothesis that people needed help kind of figuring how to sort home charging was an idea that had real legs and would, could take you a long way?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was chatting to Ash, my co-founder, about it as well. I think probably 2 points. So Ash is a very convincing person, so that helped. So he'd had this idea for a while and had researched it and done. Certainly, kind of knew that there was a niche there, and I think the combination of, we're very different thinkers, Ash and I. He's kind of visionary, big ideas. I'm much more kind of integrator, kind of make things happen. So early conversations were about taking his big vision and kind of saying, okay, how do we execute on that? And so as we started to kind of model out what it could look like, I was certainly convinced enough to say, yeah, I'm going to go all in on this. And then we were lucky enough to have some very early validation. And I think this is interesting in terms of, again, one of the big lessons, and one of the things I'm starting to talk to people about is this kind of idea validation before MVP. Is we went to a lot of industry conferences, and we talked to a lot of people, and we managed to get a conversation with, I think he was the Director of Procurement and Sustainability for Mighty, obviously big PLC. We went and met with him because we'd seen him talk at a conference about the problem that we wanted to solve. And he said, yeah, and we went down to the Shard in London, and it felt very surreal because we had nothing. It was very early, and we felt very green. But we went and had a conversation with him and talked about this idea that we had. And he basically said, yeah, if you can solve that, one, it's an industry problem. And he was a real kind of trailblazer in the EV transition industry, so that was helpful. And two, he was likely to kind of buy. Turns out it took him about 2 years to eventually buy. He wasn't even one of our first customers, but it was the validation from an industry expert who was feeling the pain that we then said, okay, yeah, we definitely think we can make this happen.
I'm going to pick up on that a sec, because one of the things that I see with startups, these early stages, is going, we've made a product, and big company really like it. And you need to kind of get them to a place where you say, great, so we've got to work on these big companies over the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. Who are you going to go after that's going to buy next week? And they're like, but big company.
Yeah.
And I often see like the pitch where there's some hand waving with big company names, but the reality is, I think you've got different kinds of decision makers that are different levels of like early adoption, and big companies have many decision makers, and a lot of them are late adopters, and you've got to get through all of them. Who did you find as your early adopters, and how did you find them?
Our first ever customer was a chimney sweep in London, and it was a woman who ran the company, and she just bought this electric van, didn't really know what to do with it. and it was going home with the driver. It was the absolute kind of sweet spot of the problem that we solved. She was a nightmare customer, but probably completely the right nightmare customer right at the beginning, because she told us everything she thought about the product, and she was our first customer, so we did everything we could to keep hold of her. But you're completely right. So we had these kind of big businesses that look great on pitch decks, and they're your, how do you scale this? How do you get 2,000-3,000 vans per customer? But they also have procurement and legal, and they don't want to sign up to a startup who's got no money and isn't ISO compliant and all those kind of things. So we then had the kind of the much smaller, and it was 1 or 2 vehicles per company, which financially does not make any sense, because I think we were charging kind of £5, £6, £7 per driver per month. So to win one company and to make £100 a year does not make financial sense. But what those people gave us the opportunity to do is to really be face to face with them, to understand, to handhold the onboarding, to see their pain points as they went on. They were vocal with feedback because they wanted this to work, and we had a lot. Our growth was lots and lots of small businesses with almost no vehicles for a long time, and then eventually, 12 months later, the big corporates, the big fleets came through. But we felt experienced by that point because we handheld the process for lots of these businesses.
I'd say she was your ideal customer, not your nightmare customer. And like you think about this a little. I mean, Roger Dawson has a book called The Secrets of Power Negotiation, and in this book he talks about pragmatists being people that have a short sales cycle and are early adopters. And the ideal scenario is in these early days a very assertive and tolerant pragmatist that believes in your mission and wants to make your mission a success as much as you do, in a way that it's another startup. And I do think there's something to be said actually for startups trading more with each other in order to provide like that early feedback, even if it's not necessarily that profitable, because it lets the company build a product that's then going to build up the badges and the certifications and the things that are going to feed into a big company and get along that journey. Yeah,
100% agree. And I think maybe there's a tendency, especially in the early stage, when you're a startup, where you're so focused on your own stuff that you think, I can't test their thing as well. But absolutely, the people at a similar stage to you are the ones who can give you best validation. I mean, interestingly, we came up at the same time as Forjaw, very good Sheffield startup, and there's a weird number of similarities in terms of how the products work across those two, and there's so much value in just having those conversations and seeing that people had the same problems, and even sharing tech and collaborating in that way.
Yeah, porosity in the ecosystem is quite helpful.
How much did the product evolve when you acquired? I think FleetCor's press release said that you were the only EV recharging solution that captures, calculates and pays for at-home business use charging directly with the energy provider. Was that the solution you came out the doors with, or was that something you built up to make sure that you stayed different?
It was largely what we came up with, but at the beginning it was manual, not automated. So there's a lot of manual processing in the background. I do remember there was a kind of a moment, a few months in, where I think Ash said it and he thinks I said it, and we kind of said, hang on, why don't we just pay energy suppliers directly? And that was quite a big change for versus the product that was there before. But actually, in terms of what the product did, the fundamentals, it was the same all the way through. But we had a head start because Ash he actually ran an energy company for a while, and he was very knowledgeable around the utility space. And we really went deep into energy and utilities at the beginning. And so in a fleet customer base who don't know any of that side, that gave us a significant advantage. What we tried to do in terms of evolving the product was, I guess, keep things manual. As you know that there's tasks that need to be automated at scale, you automate those, but you only automate the stuff where you're confident that it's a kind of long-standing challenge. And obviously the the tech kind of we finessed in the background and improved in the background, and the dashboards and the interfaces. But actually, the fundamentals of what the product did was the same almost from day one.
Traction is brought to you by Roaring Mouse, the PR and content agency building some of the world's most innovative technology businesses. And Venture Community, a cooperative society where entrepreneurs, experts and founders come together to build and accelerate startups. When it came to selling to fleets, what would you say were your most effective strategies and approaches for winning those, getting in front of those customers and winning their business?
So what's interesting for me in this, and I learned so much through doing Mina. I'm not a natural salesperson. And I remember being on some of the early sales calls and being, okay, I'm okay at this, but not I'm not going to set the world on fire. Ashley is very good, but and not really from a selling point of view, from a networking point of view. And he has this great ability to put people at ease. He's very open. He's just very good at kind of understanding people's problems, understanding people's issues. So actually what we did is we took that and we took the brand of Mina and we made sure that everyone, if you went to a fleet conference that was talking about electric vehicles, everyone there knew what Mina was and everyone knew what Mina did. We got speaking slots for Ash in a lot of different places where he could kind of talk about his background and how we were going to solve this problem. But we just had conversations, and I think this is one of those things that's a bit of a mystery to people, and certainly was a mystery to me. Is how do you sell? Well, how do you sell? You network and you talk and you listen, and you listen to what the challenges are, and you don't overly push, but you just position yourself. Because the other thing is the sales cycle can be so long. We talked about before. This might be a 2-year decision for a corporate before they sign you up. So you can't just keep pushing. You have to just be visible and be the kind of lightning rod for the industry where they go, well, who solves this problem? Oh, well, Mina do, because everything they talk about is this. And I've heard this guy shouting about them, and I've heard this guy shouting about them. Ash has spoken at this event. And so it's that kind of softer, more than anything, kind of branding, both personal branding for Ashley and broader branding for Mina, and making sure you're almost kind of omnipresent in terms of solving the very specific problem that you solve.
In my mind, there's always kind of 3 levels of belief that need to be built to kind of build up an early stage company, and there needs to be belief in the product and the provider, but also the problem.
Yes.
Did you have to do much work to convince that target audience that they had a problem, or certainly a problem worth prioritizing?
For some, yes. So the early customers, the big customers where we got a lot of traction, they were getting a lot of noise from their drivers, and their drivers were saying, you're shortchanging me. I'm plugging this vehicle in overnight and you're not paying me enough for the energy. And if you've got a fleet that's unionized, or you've got a large fleet of drivers who you're already trying to convince to take electric vehicles, and they may not be necessarily bought into that, then that makes you very quickly look for solutions as a fleet manager. You want to get out there and solve this problem because it's loud and these people aren't happy. For others, though, it was interesting because what we realized was our main competitor was not another company. It was the government rate for repaying energy. So there's in the same way that you can repay, you can claim back your fuel costs. There is a rate for claiming back electric costs for your vehicle, but it's very low. And so actually, what a lot of our marketing and branding efforts were about was saying this government rate is not fit for purpose. Your drivers are going to be annoyed, or you're either going to underpay them or you're going to overpay them. It's not accurate. And so we spent a lot of time kind of setting up this problem and shouting about this problem that maybe not everyone realised was an issue, partly because the drivers weren't kicking up a fuss, partly because they hadn't started their transition yet. We were talking to a lot of people who were, their first electric vehicle was on order for 6 months' time. And if they've not had anything delivered, if they've not experienced the product, getting them to believe that there's a problem that you can solve is very, very challenging. So yeah, we did a lot of work from a kind of branding and PR point of view, industry press, shouting about this kind of industry problem and then saying, but guess what, everyone, great news, we can solve it.
And what was it that finally convinced the the huge fleets, that you had the kind of the chops and the capability to be able to look after those guys too?
I think, again, I was surprised before about this, but I think to an extent personal relationships. So, a lot of these very senior people had me or Ashley on the end of the phone, and they would just text us, and they'd want that reassurance. They want that one person who they know is responsible to make this happen. And so building up those personal relationships was really helpful. I think that you can get to a point where there's a critical mass. So, if they're using this and we know that they're tough in their procurement process, that means we'll use this as well. And then suddenly you start to kind of knock down some of the big corporates. But a huge amount of sales effort and a huge amount of kind of keeping people warm for a long time. And I suppose to a point, there weren't alternative suppliers out there. The alternatives only just appeared probably after we exited the Me Too product. So actually, the product was so good and so unique that the only alternative was just to go through the government kind of reimbursement method. So we managed to get in at the right time, not too early, but still with the only kind of real viable solution.
And in terms of funding, you did a corporate partnership rather than going down kind of the Series A, Series B route. What was it that made you choose that option? What were the benefits? And was there, it's easy with hindsight, you got a good exit out of it. Did that potentially limit your exit opportunities further down the road, or it all worked out so there's no worries there?
Well, both. I think it all worked out, but it did definitely limit. So from a fundraising point of view, so none of us had got experience of VC or angel investment. I'd done PE and then had gone through an IPO, a previous role. So I knew about the kind of investor-facing side and the narrative side of that. So we did angel funding first. We did some Innovate UK funding as well, which there's upsides and downsides to that. And then we started a partnership with All-Star and the fuel card. So it was a partnership before it was investment. All-Star is the biggest fuel card in the UK. They had some element of the EV solution, but they really wanted home. So we started partnering with them. And they kind of heard that we were doing an angel top-up round and basically turned around and said, look, do you want us to invest? And I can't say the figure, but it was a chunky figure. We were probably, look, I suppose that you've got to caveat this with, we sold to the right people in the end, and we had a very good partnership with them. But, had something have happened, we probably painted ourselves into a corner a little bit. We were pretty naive, I guess, at the time in terms of taking the money. But also, there's huge value in taking money from All-Star because, one, it was a lot of money. Two, it was a really strategic partnership that worked really well for both sides. Gave us access to the biggest fleets in the country and gave them access to a product that they didn't have. And from the point where they invested, we knew it was a potential exit route. If I was to give advice to someone else going through a similar process, I think the only thing I'd say is ensure you still got all your options open. Yes, take that money if it's the right thing to do and if the partnership is right and if it's, you're getting a lot of value from it. But you do also need to make sure you're keeping your avenues open. And I don't have to say this because I don't work there anymore. Corpay were very good. Corpay is the parent company of All-Star. Corpay and All-Star are a very good partner to us and gave us lots of opportunities, and we really helped them. It was a really strong partnership that more than just the acquisition helped to grow the volumes within the business because they have this huge access to the biggest fleets in the country.
It's good working with corporate partnerships like that because it sets out the mission and the win-win. But of course, as you point out and discuss it, can you lock you into a particular exit path? I've seen scenarios where there's been like first refusal in there, or where competitors don't want to work with you because you're working with a particular market player. Yeah. I've also seen it where startups are actually sometimes successful in then bringing a competitor into the round or the next round.
Yeah.
And doing a bit of a Spotify strategy to solving an industry problem for the industry. Did you see that as a possibility, or were you kind of stuck? What was the nature of your getting stuck there?
I think we were naive. I think we knew that we had to raise again, and this felt like much easier money to raise. You know, a partner who knows you well, who knows the product, who is going to do very little due diligence because they completely understand what they're investing in. I think my advice to others would certainly be to get some competitive tension in there in terms of potential exit route or future investment, if that's possible to do. Because I think you end up in a place where, you know, what happens if their strategy changes and suddenly this isn't something that they care about as much and they want to continue investing in. Well, if you're not able to take investment from competitors, they may just decide not to fund, and so you could end up in a place where your business suffers as a result, and you're very much in the hands of the people that you've taken investment from. So I think this is why, you know, this is like why people like you and I and others in the ecosystem need to be there for startups to support them, because tiny decisions, it's not the taking the money, it's the term sheet that comes with the money that can really determine whether your business starts or fails.
Cracking the foundation. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think we look historically in Sheffield and this region, there's been some monopolies on VC, and the money's been flowing, but the terms have been poor, and you could have ended up choosing a VC and actually got a worse deal.
Absolutely.
You know, I think moving forwards with seeing more founder-friendly terms starting to come out, this is kind of getting more contagious from other areas that have founder-first, founder-friendly attitudes, but there's still a long way to go. And I think you're very right that competitive tension, you know, more variety of potential investment.
Yep.
The analogies that I've heard is, you know, you'll have a rare Jaguar, you take it to We Buy Any Car. They're not going to appreciate it as much as taking it to a Jaguar Owners Club. And I think one of the things I like about your story is you did a deal with the Jaguar Owners Club.
Yes.
Okay, it might have limited your exit prospects, but it meant that you were a huge amount of value went into building your company, getting you to customers, and your journey. And it might be that if you took VC, you might not have got there. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the investment that we had was quite strategic as well from Corpay's point of view. They were investing in future capability, not current financials. So I think that protected the business a little bit, and there wasn't these expectations of kind of volume growth that maybe VC would want to see. And also they knew the industry. You know, you've got investors who know exactly the problems you're going through because they're selling a similar product, or maybe they're even reselling your own product. So from a kind of point of view of them being sympathetic to what you're doing, they know this inside out. So your working relationship is always better. And then we had a guy called Tom Rowlands who was on the board, who was from All-Star or from Corpay, who was a brilliant partner because again he knew the market, he knew the industry, he knew the challenges, the opportunities, and he would always encourage us to work closer with All-Star pre-acquisition. So we'd take an investment and try and kind of bring those two things together. But he would never be pushy, and he would still give us room to go and pursue our own thing. So I think, you know, it said a lot that investment, you know, you shouldn't just be looking for cash. You should be looking for expertise and support and network and all those kind of things. And again, I didn't appreciate that until now, kind of looking back at the value, the extra value from the right kind of money.
So one thing I want to ask, your biggest mistake along the way. I mean, obviously you've had a successful journey.
Yes.
Right? So, but we all make errors, we all make mistakes, we learn as we go. What was your biggest mistake on the journey?
Yeah, difficult question. There's a lot. A lot of mistakes. I think probably if I did it over again, which I don't know whether this is a slightly different question, but I would probably automate more earlier. I think we were in a place where some of the teams were really under pressure at certain points, because when we suddenly got more volume, it was challenging because there was still a lot of manual processes within there, and I do think that stopped growth at some point. Not always, but there was a point where that became a bottleneck to growing further. I think, were I to do it now, I think that's a very different question, because I think it's a different ecosystem now. It's a different kind of industry. I think in terms of fundraising, in terms of the technology available, it's a whole different kind of ballpark. And that I like to reflect on that, because it blows my mind a little bit that in 5 years how different the whole landscape can be. And I'm also aware of that when I'm giving advice to other people. Is I don't want to give 5-year-old advice that doesn't work anymore. But yeah,
I think now if you had an automation problem, you might be able to vibe code something together with a bit of AI and knock it out. Yeah.
Can we talk about the future?
Yes.
So you are now set up as Trove Ventures.
Yes.
I see that you're an entrepreneur in residence at Sheffield Tech Parks.
I am.
What's taking your time up, and how are you going to spend the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. I'm also I do some mentoring with the Social Mobility Foundation, which is great. I'm a director for Sheffield Social Enterprise Network as well. So I guess those two things are probably a good indicator of where my mind is. I definitely, it's very trite, but I do want to kind of give back, and Sheffield was very, very good to us coming through, and I'm really passionate about kind of helping locally. Trove was set up with a very old friend of mine called Carl, who was actually employee number 3, I think, at Mina. He was our customer director, and he left about 6 months before I did, and went and set up a kind of consultancy business. So I'm enjoying working with him on that, and working with really early stage founders. Sheffield Technology Parks is great, similar thing, very, very early stage, working a little bit with the unis. And it's all that similar kind of area, those people with the seed of an idea, or an idea that's been rattling around in their head for a little while, but they don't know how to make those first few steps. That for me is the bit that I find, at least at the moment, most exciting. That's kind of the position Ash was in when we met. So it's kind of doing that with other people, not as a co-founder, but as a mentor. And really just because it doesn't feel like work, and especially after 5 years of pretty hard slog, to be able to do stuff, fortunate to be able to do stuff kind of a few days a week that does not feel like work, but is hopefully still adding value, is a real treat.
I find you get rest in the variety.
Yes,
it's fun, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I was at the University of Sheffield, their Emerge program the other day, and we sat with, and we had 19 pitches in front of us. And at the beginning of the day, you're thinking, this is going to be a long day. 19 different student or lecturer pitches about their products, but there's so much variety. You almost don't lose energy through the whole thing, because it's a new problem and a new problem and a new problem, and it's just a joy to kind of see people who want to kind of go take on the world and build new stuff.
Saw a meme this morning. It's got London startup doing some vibe coding, Sheffield startup, making the space elevator, but the VC saying, but it's a 2-hour train ride.
Very true. Yeah,
so
very true.
What I really love is we're getting some gravity together. There's like 19 pitches in a day at the uni. There's a lot going on to pull this together, to be able to pull like a day out.
Yes.
And build some relationships and build that competition and that tension. I think the future's bright for the city.
Hugely. Yeah. And my observation would be, starting a business 5-6 years ago, not really feeling like I was part of the tech ecosystem. I just moved to Sheffield, and we knew some people, and we did kind of some bits, but we didn't go to the startup meeting. We didn't go on an incubator or anything like that. And I don't think there was as much then. And maybe it's a slightly different perspective because I have the time to look around, but it feels like the critical mass is almost here. The stuff that you're doing, the stuff that the universities are doing, that Tom Wolfenden's doing at the tech parks, the innovation spine. There is so much, and I don't think there's been a better time to start a business, startup in Sheffield than today. And I think over the next couple of years it will get better and better and better.
That's all for now. From all of us here at Traction, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being part of the show. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, share, follow us for future episodes. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.